focus on Poland and Germany. This webinar has been co-organized by the Ignacy Daszyński Center and the Friedrich-Ebert Foundation Warsaw office. I will now hand over to the director of the Warsaw office, Dr. Ernst Hillebrand. Over to you.
Thank you, Bartosz, and good evening also from my side in the name of the Warsaw office of the Friedrich-Ebert Foundation. It is, as always, a great pleasure to co-organize with Daszyński Center seminars on international politics. I thank the participants, the discussants, Maciej Konieczny, Szejna, Kai-Olaf Lang, and Bryc for their participation and sharing their time and their knowledge with us on this interesting topic. Now at least we know who's going to be most probably the next president. It's going to be Joe Biden. Trump seems to accept that he did not win the elections. So we can speak with a bit more clarity about all these topics. I think to discuss it in a German-Polish constellation is always very interesting because both countries in the last 4 years marked something like opposites. I think in the perception of the United States, in Germany, Donald Trump was an extremely non-loved politician, whereas in Poland, I think the feelings and the appreciation towards Donald Trump, also thanks to some of his political decisions concerning traveling, concerning defense, had been much warmer. So now we're going to see what this all means, the new administration for Europe, for both of our countries in the coming years. And I'm looking forward to a very interesting debate. Thanks again to Daszyński, thanks to the participant, thanks to the translators. Bye.
Dziękuję bardzo za te kilka zdań.
Thank you very much for these few sentences of introduction. Now let me proceed with introducing our guests, Dr. Agnieszka Bryc, of the chair of the International Relations, the Department for Politics and Security of the Nicholas Copernicus University in Toruń. Good evening. Maciej Konieczny, the deputy for the Left Razem Party, member of the Foreign Affairs Committee of the same. Dr. Kai-Olaf Lang, senior fellow at the Stiftung Wissenschaft und Politik in Berlin. Good evening.
Dobry wieczór.
Good evening. And Councillor Andrzej Szejna, a deputy for the Left, member of the Foreign Affairs Committee of the same, ex-MEP. Andrzej will be joining us shortly. So I suggest that we start with a few introductory words. Yes, Andrzej has just joined us. There he is. Good evening. Deputy Andrzej Szejna has just joined us. Andrzej, I have just completed the round of introductions. So now let us move to the leitmotif. We are going to be focusing on the question how the election results in the US will impact the EU-US relations, with a special focus on Germany and Poland. We know that Donald Trump conceded. We know who the president-elect is. Shortly, Donald Trump's term of office will be over. He seemed to be approaching the EU not as an ally, but a competitor. He was very happy to see the Brexit. He decided to model all relations as if it was a transaction, both in terms of the military and the defense spending, for example, albeit before he had been accused of rather ambiguous relations with Russia. He did take action to attempt blocking the European gas pipe. Obviously, Poland and Germany became the focus on what was going on. The Obviously, the current Polish government was very happy with what Trump had been doing. The Polish government hoped that the transaction would actually lead to a permanent presence of American troops in Poland, thanks to the relocation of American troops from Germany. As Dr. Hillebrand had already told us, Germany had taken a different approach. They were rather afraid of a trade war that would definitely affect the Germany as a great exporter. Obviously, the EU had also been unwilling to accept Trump's overall beliefs. Nonetheless, in terms of the relocation of troops, the German political class had been rather divided, as had been some of the German political parties, at least at the overall membership mass level. That is the past. We are about to face the future. We shall be focusing on key international problems from the German and Polish perspective, including the overall transatlantic relations, the impact of President Biden's on their evolution, moreover, the impact of relations with China on the EU-US relations, also in general the EU-US relations, including trade relations, and the issue of American digital giants and taxing thereof, not to mention protection of privacy. And last but not least, we shall be focusing on the rule of law and tying the rule of law to the payout of European funding, i.e. day-to-day matters. So we have been joined by 4 panelists tonight, and we shall be discussing, shall be holding this webinar in the form of 2 rounds of interventions, and then we shall proceed to the Q&A session. You can ask your questions on Facebook and also on our own platform. We will start with Dr. Kai Olaf Lang. I will ask Dr. Kai Olaf Lang to talk about the general tendency in the development of transatlantic relations in the wake of US elections. Biden followed the slogan "Being Better." Biden and his immediate circles believe that only good and sound diplomacy, only diplomacy on a multilateral level can actually bring results. On November the 17th, the diplomacy members of Germany and France published a proclamation in a number of journals on the new shape of transatlantic relations. They received a response from Mr. Haddad and his circles, who presented their own concepts. Now, some of the concepts, while some of the concepts had not triggered major controversy, nonetheless, some had definitely triggered polemics, and that definitely gives us an overall idea of what was going on in the transatlantic relations. Now over to Dr. Kai Olaf Lang. Would you please give us a general description of the overall direction of evolution of transatlantic relations, also in the context of what Donald Trump had initiated 4 years ago, and also what is going to be going on since we have a new president-elect. Dr. Lang, over to you.
Bardzo dziękuję po pierwsze za zaproszenie. Jest to wielki honor dla mnie i poza tym jest to wyzwanie zmienienia na angielski, bo nie wiem, czy po polsku bym mógł powiedzieć to, co chcę powiedzieć, szczególnie jeżeli chodzi o takie bardziej detaliczne, bardziej parę szczegółowe aspekty naszej dyskusji.
Issues of our discussion.
So, transatlantic relations, I mean, much has been said, and I agree with all who say this is certainly a caesura, and at the same time, we should have no illusions. But I think there is a Biden effect to transatlantic relations, and no doubt Joe Biden is someone who wants to heal America, but I think he will also offer an important contribution to heal transatlantic relations. What can we expect, also bearing in mind, with the benefit of hindsight, what had changed in the last 4 years and even before? And I think the following aspects might be of a certain importance. First, I think what has been called great power competition is the overarching leitmotif also of the Biden administration when it comes to its activities in international relations. However, the approach differs because it will probably be less of a zero-sum logic which Biden and his team will apply, not defining as it has been done by members of the Trump administration, not defining international affairs as an arena where it's basically a fierce competition, and if someone else is stronger, I will be weaker, and vice versa. However, I would say, bearing in mind that cutting back the jungle, alluding to Kagan's book, I think the attempt to cut back the jungle only with liberal means will not be something the Biden administration will start from the assumption that cutting back the jungle will not be possible only with liberal means, with the traditional sort of multilateral instruments we have. However, I think the Biden administration will try to revitalize the spirit of multilateral approaches, which does not mean, or which does not equal a return to old multilateralism. I think we will face a sort of patchwork multilateralism, where also the US certainly will try to reactivate coalitions or to found even new coalitions, as Biden likes to call it. In this context, certainly the EU will be seen as instrumental. But I think we will also face the challenge. That's something we have a challenge in the US and also in Europe, that rules-based cooperation will have to be reinvigorated also by cooperating with illiberal countries. So I would say we're certainly maybe in a sort of at the beginning of a period of post-retrenchment, but this will not mean a return or a restoration of the liberal order or kind of heralding it as it had been in the good old days by the Biden administration. What does this mean for the European Union? I think the EU, of course, should first of all define its own interests. The EU should avoid to get entangled in debates about notions. We have this witnessed during the last years about strategic autonomy, what it means or not, about European sovereignty, if this is a good term or not. I think we should really start by becoming aware of our interests in the context of transatlantic relations. And I think here we should bear in mind some guidelines. The first one being, we should not go for a rupture, but we should strengthen the abilities of our self-determination. We should not go for disconnection, but solidify our capability to act. And we indeed should create, as the French and the German Prime Ministers, Le Drian and Maas, have put it in the mentioned article, we should create a sort of transatlantic unity, but not confound this with a uniformity in transatlantic relations. relation. So in a way, the EU should show that it is a useful partner for the Americans, but the Americans should know that they can't take the EU for granted in all questions. A final word, but I think we'll come back to that as we have a Polish-German debate here. What does this mean for our dialogue and our cooperation? I think the victory of Biden is not the worst option for German-Polish relations and their attitude towards transatlantic relation. I think strengthening the dialogue, our bilateral dialogue, and I leave it aside if it is possible with the current domestic political parameters, especially in Poland. But I think for Germany, such a reinforced dialogue would show to the Americans that we have a staunch Atlanticist on our side and that we do not signal or that we do transatlantic relations, including security, but also the other stuff, not only with France. So we could advance controversial issues like, for example, taxes on digital giants and so on, together with a staunch pro-Atlanticist. And for Poland, this also means Poland could show to the Americans, to the Biden administration, which in some aspects will certainly take a critical stance towards the current Polish government. We also want to discuss transatlantic relation with a key country in the European Union, and we do it not in order to weaken the EU, but to strengthen the EU as a building block in functioning transatlantic relations. Final sentence, I think Germany and Poland should, on the one hand, signal that we want to strengthen transatlantic relations in the broader setting, in the NATO, but also by having an effective US-EU dialogue, but by doing, of course, bilateral relations with the US, but also by establishing other minilateral formats. I think it has been typical also, this is something we can debate, that the article by the French, that it was an article by the French and the German foreign minister, and not an article, for example, by the ministers of the Weimar Triangle. And at the end, I think Germany and Poland should try to give added value to transatlantic relations in important issue areas, which are also of relevance for Biden. Some are discussing the possibility of having a transatlantic Green Deal, so climate policies, infrastructures, Eastern Partnership, and of course also the huge geopolitical questions like Russia and China. I'll stop here.
Bardzo dziękuję za ten głos. Dziękuję też.
Thank you very much for that intervention, and thank you also for keeping to the time. I did not say that right now, but I wrote it in your emails. I will ask for speaking within 5 to 7 minutes. And now I would invite Deputy Maciej Konieczny. And would you please relate to the subject already called out by Dr. Lang, the digital giants? If we are to stay at the level of this polemic, which already has gone through the media, the Americans really had state that digital sovereignty resolutions on the EU side is detrimental to the US. I think in the latter days, the French decided to collect taxes based on that premise, which will likely be an issue in transatlantic relations, while the French and German foreign ministries did not touch on that in their article, which shows that there is tension on the subject. And the Club of Mr. Szejna has put on the table a draft on that taxation. And the question is it possible to gain some sort of compromise in the area of digital sovereignty of Europe so as to give EU citizens some elementary privacy, at the same time uh, giving budget revenues to European tax offices, which are going to be very valuable at this time. Well, I will relate to the moment that when there is a change in the White House, and we should ask ourselves what of the things that we have seen was incidental and Trump related, or what will live on and stay even after Biden comes into the White House. The curbing of the digital giants, or let's put it in a general way, big American businesses, and also to confront extreme inequalities and concentration of capital in a few hands, and a big skew of the balance of power in today's world. Then the question is whether the renewed transatlantic relations, the cooperation between America and Europe, are we able to address these key problems, mm, uh, including these big corporate entities? And we can at once see that it won't be easy. But here, Europe does have some sort of precedence, and also has done a lot of good, that we should not succumb to the new redistribution of riches, and we should not succumb or bury democracy, passing it into the hands of big corporations. The taxation of digital giants, and that's not the only thing that has to be done, because the supervision has to be broader. There is no enthusiasm for that in the new administration. The new Green Deal, the climate change matter, this has already been shown that the new administration is hiring people connected to the fracking industry and other fossil energy companies, fossil fuel energy companies. Countries of Europe, when it comes to superimposing or imposing issues of taxation, but also privacy to big corporations, our faction in Parliament has come forward with a draft law on taxing these companies. And this is questioning the intent of the government, which is very strongly related or in very close cahoots with the US, but at the same time, they are advocates of doing away with the tax havens, of pro-European solutions. But when they tried to do that, one sentence from Mike Pence ended it. So we have to remember these things. When drugs were supposed to be reimbursed, it was just enough that one phone from the American embassy was made, and an American product was listed on the reimbursement list. I'm sorry I'm going on to that level, but I think it is important that we face up to the economic aspect. Poland is a country which spends proportionately more than other countries on defense. We are just buying our security from America, and at the same time, we're spending much less on healthcare. People who die in Poland today do not die of military threats. They die because our healthcare is less than perfect. The expectations that we should have vis-a-vis the American administration would be, of course, mixed. We are very happy that Donald Trump is a thing of the past, and that will certainly do a lot of good to European-American relations. The new administration will not try to thwart European activities per se. I could compare that to a very sick person who has been stabilized, and we know that he's going to be okay, but this is a track sports athlete who is to run 100 meters in a moment. So the question is this new administration able to meet these tremendous challenges, the climate, but also um, uh, taking some sort of control of this wild capitalism, which has led to the accumulation of capital to a degree that has not been precedented unless we go as far back as the 19th century. So the answer on that count is less optimistic. So the outcome of the elections in America does bring relief, but not so much hope for the future. It is more like cutting out a problem, but not proposal of ambitious solutions that we need today. And based on this digital tax, if this administration does not decide to compromise, if it will adopt a do or die stance on protecting these corporate interests, where the world needs a better redistribution of riches and they need funding for the Green Deal or green transformation. Uh, Perhaps we have a lesser evil, but a better good is still way ahead. Sorry I went into that, but I really needed to touch on the digital tax. Yes, I think it's very good that you treated the digital tax matter as a basis for a broader discussion of relations between Europe and the US, or Poland and the US. In either case, the relations are asymmetrical, which can be confirmed by the situation vis-à-vis the digital tax. Before we move on to Dr. Agnieszka Bryc, we will be. I will just announce that we can ask questions or signal questions. So the Democrats have taken over the White House, and recently they were very hawkish um, against Russia, which was partly uh, justified by the so-called stolen elections where Donald Trump won, and they are putting their money on the possibility to deter Russia. Um, and the head of diplomacy um, wants to go back to discussing the Open Sky Treaty and the New START. And again, looking at this media polemic between representatives of diplomacy and think tanks, the matter of relations with Russia re-emerged. To what degree should Biden come in with a new opening? And the subject of Nord Stream 2 was also mentioned there. What is your opinion? What will these relations with Russia or of Russia look like with Biden's USA and the European Union, where we see conflicting interests on the Eastern axis? Well, thank you for the invitation. We have lots to talk about. I only have 5 to 7 minutes, so I'll get away from small talk, but just as a matter of introduction, I will say that the Russians are now asking exactly the same questions that are being asked in Warsaw, Berlin, and other parts of the world. How much continuation and how much change is going to come about in Biden's administration? I think the Russians are presenting this perspective in very concrete planes of space, so to say. If we speak of the continuation matter, they want to know how much Trump there will be in Biden or how much Obama will there be in Biden. That's most important for them now. If we just look at these mottos, these buzzwords, Biden announces that he will stay with the Chinese priority. That is a signal for Russia that they are still in the game, which can, I'm not saying that it can give Americans the upper hand. The Russians know what they're worth, but it just shows that the game is still open. There is still something to win. And also, under Biden, the Russians will try to win something in the global US-Chinese game. Biden returns. This is a continuation for me. Biden comes back to the multilateralism policy with European partners and therefore returns to a transatlantic perspective. Hence, the Russians can expect more engagement, perhaps less spectacular. The transatlantic issues will not be highlighted as they used to be. There will be more discussion. The differences between Europe and America will still be there, but in terms of image, the West will be more cohesive. And that may make life more difficult for Russians in their approach to the West, because Russians do expect a tightening of relations in NATO. The Russian-Turkish relations will therefore possibly face a new turn. And there is also going to be some outspoken reaction to issues of rule of law. And the West is clever enough to know that Russians are weakening the unity of the West by preferring bilateral relations. And now the question is whether Biden is able to force the Germans, less so the French, but whether they will be able to make the Germans to be more homogeneous in their positions with America vis-à-vis the Russians. The next issue are economic interests. everybody knows that regardless of who occupies the White House, the continuity in the military aspect, read as the presence of American troops in Europe, the a day and age of blackmailing Europe with the threat of withdrawal of troops is over. The Russians know full well that in the aspect of economic interests, they are threatened by the Trump in Biden. That's a question of the sanctions regarding Nord Stream 2. A Norwegian company has just withdrawn, and the Russians expect that even though he will become the president soon and he will be a Democrat, the Americans will not give up an instrument of pressure, which are sanctions on Nord Stream 2. And they are instruments of pressure not only vis-à-vis Russia, but also vis-à-vis Europe. And they will have to, well, put away this initiative for the time being. And what opportunities do they see? The first change for them, and we as Poles and Europeans should also be wary and reduce our expectations vis-à-vis Biden. The Russians understand that there is no return to Obama's policy. No Obama 3.0 is coming. The international setting has changed, and Biden has to operate in completely new circumstances. He may have all of Obama's men in his administration. He may have on the agenda all the priorities of Obama, or known in the times of Obama, but that is not going to be Obama relived. The people will be, Obama's people will be more experienced with a clearer picture of what's happening in the world. So there are different conditions then. And another thing, after 2014, the Americans, and especially Joe Biden, who grew up in times of Cold War, and under various presidents also supporting Barack Obama, he is a president who will have a very realistic, sober, not at all naive approach to Russia. And I think Russians know that the image of Russia from the times of Yeltsin or early Putin is gone forever. Russia is going to be authoritarian, seen as authoritarian and revisionist, and able to apply force in their direct neighborhood. So now people from the West tend to understand that Moscow should not be approached as a potentially democratic country. So the conclusions on the American side, or from the American side, relating to the American side, is such that there will be sanctions. There will be sanctions. There will be more stick than carrot. And the sanctions have to be effective. If they are to be effective, they don't have to be so much painful for Russia, but they have to be deterrent for all the countries in the West who want to run a dual standard policy. The so-called sanctions against Russia will mean not only punishing Russia, but also deterring Western states who could try to break out of the restrictions policies.
Obviously, it will be quite new to Russia what Biden will propose in terms of safety, specifically cyber threats. And Russians are aware that that will target China as well as Russia. They were connected. The Americans will connected through Biden's appeal for creating a Western democratic world under slogans of rule of law. I have no idea how effective that pressure shall be because it does not have to affect Moscow directly. Nonetheless, what Moscow can expect is that the US will be pressurizing the European Union and the European Union will, in the upcoming period, shall be focusing on rule of law and the defense against, rogue states or the cyber authoritarian states. And last but not least, what does that mean to Russia? It means that things will not be easy, but they will remain part of the game. As you said yourself, Bartosz, there are a number of treaties that determine global safety, and Russia is definitely a partner that one has to talk to. They are therefore counting on the process of building some kind of dialogue with their partners in the West. And one other very important matter, truly my last comment, it focuses on Belarus. Russians definitely are supporting the Western world and the EU in their neutral attitude towards Belarus. Russia wants to create a situation whereby the red line between the West and the East will become, ascertained, if you will. And this is the final moment for the European Union. Unless it takes action, unless the West decides to not use sanctions or mini sanctions, but actual action in terms of the rule of law. This is also a comment concerning the Polish problem. And the Russians will find that they are, yes, in a difficult situation, but they can still play the West because there are a number of alternatives open to them. I apologize for using more time than allocated. Thank you very much for that introduction. It leads us to the next topic. That is the obviously we have the EU-US relations to consider, but we also have the EU-US-Chinese relations to consider. That will definitely determine our outlooks for 2021. It goes without saying that Trump had simply taken a different take towards China. It seems that China is now being seen as a rival rather than a partner. That is a serious change, and that may prove Trump's most fixed, if you will, permanent legacy. We have a former Secretary of State who wants to support the building of democratic states that will be talking to Putin and Pyongyang in Asia. We also have the other issue that Dr. Bryc talked about, the Chinese 5Gs. And the question remains whether they can be implemented in EU countries or not. That is another major topic. And obviously we have to consider the military confrontation on the Southeast Chinese Sea. The US have already made Chinese realize that they are ready to sink their ships on that particular reservoir. So in all probability, we can expect escalation of that attitude, albeit it is being said that the Chinese kept their fingers crossed for Biden rather than Trump. The situation is not simple. I hope that our next speaker, Deputy Andrzej Szejna, will guide us from the across the labyrinth of the EU-US-China relations. Thank you very much. Well, it takes more than a few minutes to guide you guys through that labyrinth. All I can do is focus on a number of important problems. Yes, it is obviously true that we were awaiting the results of US elections with something of a tension. We are talking about truly difficult problems. Russia is gradually walking away from a model of a democratic state, also in terms of pandemic and clandestine surveillance. But the same goes for the US. The changes definitely affected all these, affected the entire world of transatlantic relations. Well, and that is a certain arrangement that the EU has to face the music with regard to. It is not obvious how the EU should behave once we approach specific topics. It is not a comment in the general. We should be responding in the specific. Firstly, the US define China and consider China the greatest threat to the security of the world and of the US, not only in terms of the military, but in terms of trade, of commerce, of trade exchange. We are talking about battles for state-of-the-art technologies. Yes, indeed, the violation of human rights in Hong Kong, in Taiwan, yes, the South Chinese Sea. So, yes, indeed, there we are. And I don't think that there's going to be a difference between the Republican and Democrat administrations. We know that Joe Biden had met Xi Jinping when neither had been president. Joe Biden was vice president at the time. And after that meeting, if memory serves, he said that he believes that Xi Jinping is not a man with a democratic spine, with palpable democratic spine. That is not a guy behaving in any kind of democratic way, which definitely says a lot about what Joe Biden thinks about the Chinese engagement policy. That is not my personal opinion. According to the US administration and according to some European politicians I will talk about shortly, well, that politics simply did not work. People naively believed that China will go through some kind of change, that we are going to end up creating a global village, one that global policies will be based on. But obviously, this, once we listen to the Chinese president's narrative, yes, indeed, it is rather general. It is global, fighting the pandemic, taking care of the most impoverished, fighting climate change. That is obviously great to hear, but it does not really attempt or affect, the trade relations. Now, Joe Biden had threatened China in an article in Foreign Affairs of the United States, where he told China that he is going to be firm unless China abandons the policy of robbing American companies of their technologies, of their copyrights, unless China ceases financing companies who want to gain a dominant position on markets across the world. And that is definitely going to, that is going to come to pass. There's no question there. Now we ought to move to the issue concerning the EU approach. Now the situation has changed here as well. If memory serves, in 2019, the President Macron invited Angela Merkel for his meeting with Xi Jinping. He also invited Mr. Juncker, proving that the EU is going to attempt to speak with a single voice. That obviously is not fully realistic. It is not entirely true. It goes without saying that in terms of cooperation, trade or political relations, well, definitely Germany is in the lead of in terms of relationships with the US. The interests of member states are nuanced. They have also been imprinted by amazing pressures exerted by the United States. In other cases, they also tie in with the economic cooperation, well, certain dependence on the chain of supplies. This is obvious, people know it. This is something we're also discussing. Nonetheless, everything is taking place on a specific commercial plane. So you cannot sever all ties between the rule of law and trade. Moreover, I'm sorry, I have lost the speaker. I'm sorry, I have lost the speaker. Sound quality has gone down. China has begun trying to arrange commercial space with their elbows. And obviously the Polish diplomacy does not understand what economization of foreign services is. Well, actually, current Polish government does not understand anything, to put it bluntly. There is nothing in the Polish foreign policy that we can grasp and be led by, and things are particularly chaotic when it comes to our relations with the Chinese. So there are a number of things that have to be considered. Many local things have taken on an international dimension in terms of economy, as well. Now, the question of where will that battle take place is a very interesting one. The European Union obviously has its own occasionally contradictory interests with the United States. And China, well, China will definitely make an effort to enter the European market worth hundreds of billions of dollars. This had been the purpose of the new Silk Route. Milk and apples, I believe. And when I visited the Chinese embassy, I heard how wonderfully the Polish farmers are taking advantage of that cooperation, of the collaboration scheme. And nonetheless, the entire revolution has its economic background also in the Belarus. Belarus is on the Silk Route, and that is important both for China and Belarus. Consequently, Belarus is not only present in the overall realm of US or European, but Chinese influence as well. This is something that Trump did not understand. Yes, indeed, there is a battle for Europe, for the European market between China and the US. And that leads me to a very interesting case. We are talking about fundamental issues concerning the development of commercial or trade space. The first thing is energy security. I am not going to get into detail because this particular topic does not really tie in with China. Nonetheless, Poland's security policy has to be taken into account. We are part to the New Green Deal and so on and so forth. Nonetheless, there is another matter to be considered. United and integrated digital market. That is another issue to be considered. That is a thing of the future. And I think we have all noticed that, especially in times of the pandemic. But it is all about communication. But also in terms of 5G, but the Internet of Things and the evolvement of artificial intelligence. So we have, what we are facing is development and a certain technological leap and support for enterprises that do obviously take advantage of the digital market. That is definitely a challenge for the European Union, i.e. the digital transformation. In October, the European Council actually focused on that particular topic, announcing the development of a uniform digital market. Nonetheless, they said that we are going to be using a uniform toolkit, but the European Union also said, the Council also said, that suppliers will be picked and chosen according to uniform criteria. And that takes me to a marvelous phenomenon throughout Europe, that is the, well, boycotting, if you will, of Huawei. In Poland, as usual, we are going about it in a rather primitive fashion in order to suck up to the United States diplomacy, to put it very bluntly. So things became very hectic at the Chinese embassy, and from what I know, we have very limited contacts with Huawei at this point, but that is not about a single case study. It is about the entire economic policy, and I'm talking about Poland here and Europe as well, in terms of the overall concept. Now, the question is whether Europe will evolve her own policy and her own concept all by herself. We have Ericsson, Huawei's obvious main competitor. So are we going to be cooperating with the United States? And there is another question that comes to mind. Yes, we do have the subsidies and the grants and subventions and supporting unfair competition. But don't you think that as a result of all that, China has indeed become a leader on the state-of-the-art technologies market? On the one hand, we have safety to consider. On the other hand, we don't want to lead to a situation whereby once we eliminate the Chinese supplier, we are going to generate huge costs to the operators who will be forced to replace all infrastructure. That obviously will translate into higher costs for users, well, end users as well. But for example, Huawei and other Chinese companies, they have made it to the European market and they are lawful entities. So why on earth are we trying to get rid of them now? And that is an excellent case study, the Polish government. Well, we know that the Americans are going to be building 5G networks in Poland, according to Ms. Mosbacher, who tweeted that she had actually made a deal with President Duda. Now, is that the format we are stooping to? This is the format of forging international relations? Well, many people became interested. We had a meeting of the Foreign Affairs Committee because the Polish government had actually tabled an amendment of the law on cybersecurity and public security. And according to that new law, a supplier may be excluded from any kind of bidding process if that entity is registered in a country violating the human rights, or if the activities of that supplier may have a negative impact on the local market. I am sorry, the quality of the sound has dropped again. Yes, what we are talking about here is a single company. And the discussions began in the Polish government. All of a sudden, China was supported by Zbigniew Ziobro, but most recently Zbigniew Ziobro had been actually opposing anything and everything that Prime Minister Morawiecki is doing. But for example, in Sweden, the government blocked an auction for the very reason that Huawei was to be kept away from the market.
And now, if we collect all that into one basket, we should ask ourselves, what is the real interest of the European Union and the real interest of Poland? Because it can be easily noticed that some of the interests come in or stand in conflict, and the European Union has to formulate its own policy regarding that, which is lacking. And another open question, what should be the policy of Poland? Because the benefits from trade with China, also including the Silk Road, are certainly positive and a part of the future. And at the same time, being servilistic to the US or to China will not serve Polish interests. Thank you, Deputy, for this contribution. We will stay on the Chinese subject. Dr. Lang will be asked as the next speaker to comment on that subject. To what degree should positions of member states of the EU be coordinated in whatever relates to China? And the next aspect of coordination is the Euro-Atlantic one. If the EU develops a position vis-à-vis China, should it be coordinated with the US? The Polish thread here is interesting because the approach to China under the present party's government has been varied. When Beata Szydło was the PM, it was warm. Then Mr. Morawiecki, as the PM, blocked her away. And we see some contradictions. How can we overcome such contradictions at the European or transatlantic level? And Dr. Lang, please comment on that.
Dziękuję.
Thank you. I will try
to be brief because a lot has been said, and I was quite lengthy in my introductory statement. When it comes to China, my impression is that in a way similar to what Agnieszka said regarding Russia, the China would have preferred in a way Trump, at least in the long run. He was seen as the president who does retrenchment, who withdraws the US from multilateral fora, who also did a rather chaotic management of the pandemic in the US. So with Joe Biden, there might be a US president who is able to organize broader alliances, revitalize the Old West, combine this with US allies in Asia, so to form an effective counterweight and to be much more effective in doing containment policies. And I think, of course, there might be some overlaps, some new opportunities for even cooperation between China and the US with this commitment to multilateralism, for example, when it comes to climate issues. But also here, I mean, yes, China declared the objective of carbon neutrality by 2016. I think this was primarily a signal towards the European Union when this was done, I think in September. But with the US president being more open towards an ambitious policy of CO2 reduction, that might also be an argument for introducing the new tariffs against China if they're to create level playing field. Yeah, if they, apart from the rhetorics of the 2016 objective, in practice they will be laggards. So I think for China, Joe Biden is certainly a considerable challenge. Now, when it comes to the European side, I would say we are the time of strategic dormancy is over. We're in a at least at the beginning of a period of European post-mercantilism when it comes to China. Some aspects were already mentioned. So I think the fact that the EU in its famous document from March 2019 calls China a systemic rival, the fact that we have a debate how to create instruments about investment screening, bearing into account security implications of Chinese investments and so on. But I think also the fact that something which in Germany is often controversially debated, the 17+1 initiative has, I would not say failed, but I think it is visible that this is not a very powerful instrument to divide the European Union. China rather tries to establish bilateral relationships with countries all over the EU, but also in the eastern part. But I think if you look at the 70+1 countries, I think here we have, of course, as it was already also said, US pressure. A couple of countries in the eastern part of the European Union have signed bilateral agreements with the United States on security concerning digital infrastructures. Romania, under obviously American pressure, changed its plans to expand its nuclear power plant with a Chinese investor, and probably it will be built by a US investor. So I think this is also an element, of course, in the equation. And then the way China has dealt, especially with smaller and medium-sized countries. We know the story of the visit of the Speaker of the Czech Senate to Taiwan, and what this and other activities of even Czech municipalities, what kind of reaction this has caused in China. And I think this was not only in the Czech Republic, but also elsewhere seen as something which was not a very smart way to deal with a problem in bilateral relations. I think this all together has brought the EU to a situation of wake up. But I think many in Germany and in other European countries certainly explicitly disliking Donald Trump have admitted that Trump has, with his way of dealing with China, has had a certain function. Where the German business circles and others said, we don't like the way he does it, but in terms of the content, we are quite on the side of the Americans. So, and I think if this is now embedded in a more multilateral, more dialogic transatlantic approach, I think there is, of course, an opportunity that the Americans will and the Europeans will find at least a common language when it comes to approaching China. Not denying, of course, that we will have strong bilateralisms with China, that we will have a strong element of pragmatism, including, of course, countries like Germany. I mean, every third German car is third car produced by German car makers is sold in China. Volkswagen has roughly about 40% of its cars sold in China. Not all of them, of course, produced in Germany. So I think, yes, strategic awakening of Europe in a way.
Dziękuję za ten głos, ten płynny sposób doszliśmy do drugiej.
Thank you for this contribution, and that way we have smoothly gone into the second round of the discussion. The order of speaking will be somewhat different. We have questions here. Dr. Jacek Rutkiewicz is asking about the Intermare initiative. Does it have any future? The Americans allegedly are to support it. The question goes further to ask, can it be integrated into some European Union perspective? Can it be coordinated with the directions of development of the European Union? I would like to direct this question to Dr. Bryc. I would also like to touch on Nord Stream again, because that is a burning issue. Would you please venture some sort of guesswork as to the future? I know scientists dislike that, but will Nord Stream be kicked off or not? Well, the first
bardzo często prognozujemy, lubimy to robić, tylko nie każdy się przyznaje do tego, że prognozujemy, bo potem się czasem trzeba tłumaczyć, dlaczego nasze scenariusze okazały się mało trafne, ale to nie jest tak, że nie prognozujemy, my naprawdę się zajmujemy w zasadzie najczęściej tym, bo to, co, czego zwykle o co nas się pyta, to nie to, co było, co jest, tylko jak się spodziewamy, więc można było się spodziewać tego pytania. Ale tak już do rzeczy, konkretnie. Ja mam wrażenie, i to także takie sygnały płyną z jednej strony z naszych gdzieś tam zaprzyjaźnionych kolegów, analityków ze Stanów Zjednoczonych, a z drugiej strony ja gdzieś podglądam podobne oceny, czy w ogóle zaniepokojenie strony rosyjskiej, co w takim razie z inicjatywą tutaj w Europie Środkowej, Międzymorza, Trójmorza. Wnioski są takie, w zasadzie informacje są najpierw takie, że można się spodziewać, ja też jestem tego zdania, że zostanie ona podtrzymana przez nową ekipę, bez względu na to, że była ona mocno promowana przez administrację Trumpa. Wpisuje się w to absolutnie logikę polityki amerykańskiej, bo nie możemy się spodziewać tego, że prezydent Biden tylko dlatego, że była to inicjatywa popierana przez Trumpa, ma raptem zrezygnować z instrumentu wpływu na wszystkich. Z jednej strony na Unię Europejską i Niemcy, z drugiej strony na flankę z Polską, prawda, w środku, jeszcze powiedzmy na całą Europę Środkową. Więc ja się nie spodziewam, że ta inicjatywa absolutnie przepadnie. Nie wiem, na ile ona może się rozwinąć, ale myślę, że to jest kwestia inteligentnego, to jest podkreślam warunek, inteligentnego rozgrywania tej sprawy przede wszystkim przez dyplomację polską. I teraz zależy to także od tego, jak bardzo władze w Warszawie, zabrzmi nie dyplomatycznie, ale to trzeba pewne rzeczy nazywać po imieniu, na ile będą w stanie wycofać się w sposób mądry z dotychczasowego upierania się przy takim podejściu trumpistowskim i zweryfikują swoją politykę, czyli naszą politykę zagraniczną i przywrócą jej charakter taki prozachodni, w tym proamerykański. Bo błędem fatalnym było to, żeby się w zasadzie tak jak trochę Rosja i prezydent Putin upieraliśmy przy nieuznawaniu wyników wyborów i tak obstawaliśmy przy tym, że prezydent Trump może mieć uzasadnione zastrzeżenia do procesu wyborczego. Więc to był błąd z naszej strony. I teraz pytanie jest takie, i ja myślę, że to nasi koledzy w Warszawie sobie także zadają to pytanie, na ile Joe Biden będzie kierował się pragmatycznym interesem, nie zrezygnuje z inicjatywy Trójmorza, czyli nie wycofa ze wsparcia, a na ile będzie chciał, prawda, postawić w pionie we właściwym porządku polityków w Warszawie. Obstawiam pragmatyzm, a nie podejście takie emocjonalne. To jest raz. Jeżeli wyczerpuje to odpowiedź, to ja mam nadzieję, że to wystarczy, bo czasu jest mało. Druga sprawa, Nord Stream 2. Pytanie było takie, czy Nord Stream 2 zostanie zakończony. Ja zakładam, że bez względu na aktualną awanturę, prawda, chaos informacyjny, to znaczy dużo się pisze, są różne sygnały z różnych stron. Wszyscy zastanawiają się, czy Nord Stream 2 zostanie dokończony. Ja patrzę na sprawę Nord Stream 2 w kategoriach nie tego, czy zostanie dokończony, tylko myślę już w kategoriach co po Nord Stream 2, bo ja nie mam wątpliwości, że projekt zostanie dokończony, nawet w warunkach sankcji amerykańskich, bo Rosjanie, jeżeli w sam projekt zainwestowano prawie 10 miliardów euro, z czego 80% jest już absolutnie, chyba 94% trasy jest położone i 80% w ogóle funduszy na ten projekt zostało skapitalizowanych i wykorzystanych, to ja jestem przekonana, że Rosjanie będą w stanie z dużymi trudnościami, z dużym oporem sfinalizować na własny koszt czy dokończyć tą inicjatywę. I teraz pytanie jest, w zasadzie ta piłeczka jest nie po stronie rosyjskiej, tylko po stronie europejskiej, jak się zachowają rządy najbardziej zainteresowane, czyli Berlin, a także inne kraje europejskie, bo my często w Polsce mamy taką manierę rozmawiania o Nord Stream 2 tylko w kategoriach polityki niemieckiej, a nie polityki europejskiej. Więc dla mnie to jest pytanie do naszych partnerów europejskich. Ale ja bym jeszcze podkreśliła jedną ważną rzecz. Nord Stream 2 w mojej ocenie będzie dokończone z opóźnieniem, ale tu się szykuje i o tym także warto mówić. Nord Stream 2 to nie jest jedna historia. Przed nami cały wielki nowy rozdział pod tytułem polityka klimatyczna, nowy zielony deal. I do tego także Rosjanie coraz częściej się ustosunkowują i wiedzą, że powoli kończy się era gospodarki opartej na złożach kopalnianych. I to też oznacza, ja nie mówię, że za rok, za dwa, ale Rosjanie także prognozują i oni wiedzą, że swoją szansę modernizacyjną oni zmarnowali i trudno będzie doskoczyć, może inaczej, trudno będzie w dzisiejszych warunkach zaostrzonej rywalizacji i konkurencji gospodarczej, trudno im będzie zdobyć to, do czego dążą, czyli do dywersyfikacji bezpieczeństwa energetycznego własnego, bo Europa daje im pewien wyjście na rynki zachodnie. Pamiętajmy, że azjatyzacja handlu surowcami energetycznymi nie powiodła się. Ona się skończyła w zasadzie na Chinach, nic więcej tam się specjalnego nie wydarzyło. I dla Rosji, Rosja, ja też tak patrzę w takich kategoriach. My często widzimy szantaż rosyjski, prawda, Gazprom trzymający Europę trochę za gardło. To nie tak jest. Znaczy, to nie do końca tak jest. Europa ma całą masę instrumentów oddziaływania, między innymi akcentowanie i nastawianie się tak slowly na politykę znacznie bardziej przyjazną środowisku. I warto o tym pamiętać. Ja też zauważam naprawdę dużą zmianę w uwadze i w zainteresowaniu po stronie rosyjskiej, więc Nord Stream 2 tak będzie, ale z trudnościami. Wchodzi nowy gracz i to Rosjanie widzą, amerykański, bo nie da się już dzisiaj wyrzucić z rynku europejskiego konkurencji amerykańskiej. Ona może tylko narastać i tego się także Rosjanie spodziewają. Co więcej, zobaczmy, co się dzieje na południu Europy. Przecież mamy Morze Śródziemne, ostatnią awanturę turecko-cypryjską. Mamy apetyt Izraelczyków na to, żeby przesyłać swój gaz także, prawda, na północ do Europy. Mamy nowe projekty południowe, więc Rosjanie, to nie jest tak, że jakieś Rosjanie mogą spodziewać się powrotu do tej wielkiej bonanzy surowcowej. Będzie tylko znaczy będzie jeszcze trudniej i Rosjanie mają tego świadomość. Jeżeli wyczerpałam albo przynajmniej w jakimś stopniu odpowiedziałam na pytania, to z mojej strony to tyle. Dziękuję.
I hope that I have answered your question to a certain extent. Thank you very much. I absolutely agree that the predictive function of science is very important. So thank you very much, Doctor, for exhausting the trope in terms of prognosis. Now, with regard to the financial issues, well, yes, the Polish government has actually caused some havoc. Nonetheless, we cannot turn the clock back. Now we can move to the next matter. Now I'm going to ask Andrzej Szejna to speak. I am going to focus on a thing of great importance, i.e. the rule of law. We can all recall what Joe Biden had said. Poland had been made part of the overall phenomenon of growing totalitarian regimes around the world. Possibly that was somewhat unfair, but yes, we know that tweets about the LGBT-free zones, and we know what Madame Ambassador Mosbacher had tweeted, and how she had responded. Nonetheless, yes, it is very important how things are going to evolve in terms of human rights, and that is not obviously only a Polish topic, it is also one for the international scene. Deputy Andrzej Szejna. Yes, thank you. I had been talking about it before when talking about China. Joe Biden will not be following Donald Trump's policies. He is not going to be to become a door-to-door salesman. He is not going to be trading in some commercial privileges in exchange for turning a blind eye to the violation of the rule of law. He is not going to do that for China, and he's not going to do that for Poland. It goes without saying that the US president does not really speak openly about these things. There had been one case during Trump's administration. There was one such case of by Ms. Ambassador Mosbacher. She actually put a list together of all the LGBT-free zones in Poland. I don't know why she did that. Nonetheless, gossip had it that should Trump have won, she would have been replaced by a person who actually who actually favors these communities, such communities. In terms of what is being tweeted and what is being said, among others, by Madame Vice President Harris, things are clear. I wish to remind you of the post-election evening. She talked in a very inclusive and empathetic way. She declared that America will not leave anybody alone, regardless of the skin color, legal status, or sexual orientation. I believe that this is definitely a left turn in American politics. Nonetheless, I believe that her comment had tied in with what is going on in the society and on the market. The pandemic is in full swing. I'm sorry, I cannot understand a word of what the speaker is saying.
Natomiast gdybym się chciał przejść na grunt polski, to ma jedynego sojusznika dzisiaj, jakim są Węgry. No, chyba już skończyło się spotkanie pana premiera Orbana i pana premiera Morawieckiego.
I believe that the Orban-Morawiecki meeting is now over. Now the worst thing is that we are going to be left as Poland in an alliance with Hungary, suffering their own problems with corruption and EU funding, and nobody, not only Biden, but nobody in Europe understands what the Polish government intends to achieve. Because, well, since I have the floor, I'm going to reiterate it. Today, we are facing a situation whereby we were to be deprived of EU funding because of violations of the rule of law. Well, that will obviously only take place if it is found that it affects the budget. Obviously, we also have to bear in mind that this is subject to a qualified majority in the Council. Only then does the Commission touch it. And pragmatically speaking, the Polish government are something of a kamikaze, because even if they veto the budget and they lead to something of a budgetary proviso, it has to be borne in mind that this regulation shall also comprise funding for the budget proviso. In other words, they will not achieve anything apart from having Poland deprived of the economic reconstruction fund. I can imagine a Spanish barber or Swedish skier or French farmer are just sitting there and wondering why on earth does the Polish government want to deprive them of their funds they should receive. That's the problem. So in summary, the Polish government will find it very difficult to find any kind of ally apart from the US. Thank you very much. I would also want to add that in Poland,
z funduszami europejskimi podlega jurysdykcji sądów administracyjnych, które nie zostały.
The issue of payments, EU payments, remain with the jurisdictions of, well, local jurisdictions which have not yet been affected by so-called good change by the Law and Justice government. So I believe that we are just about to we are definitely left with Orban only as an ally, and we'll see who is going to replace Ms. Mosbacher. Richie Rennell, maybe. Maybe she's going to remain in office. Maybe it's going to be Stedfeld. We'll see. Anyhow, Deputy Konieczny will now be entrusted with the summarizing of our meeting. You can definitely refer to topics that have not been touched upon here, whether it's going to be, that is the presence of American troops, but also the climate policy. I think that everybody mentioned it, but nobody took a comprehensive approach. So now over to Deputy Konieczny. I'll try to be as brief as possible. We are slowly but surely approaching 8 p.m. Now, in terms of the presence of American troops, I am under the impression that the debate concerning most recent agreement discussed in the Sejm came as something of a surprise to me. Yes, there were certain critical voices, and we also asked whether it pays or not. The American troops resembled a topic that resembled talking about the Pope, that once we begin criticizing it, we are going to be attacked. We're going to be attacked. But it turns out that the anti-law and the justice also told their own people to criticize the nature of that agreement. I think that what we deserve is a fair debate concerning real boundaries of our security. We deserve a good debate on the costs and other related matters. Let me reiterate that the threat to Polish lives at this particular moment arises from the underfunding of the Polish medical services. That is not quantum physics. You can definitely, once you check the budget, you will find that military expenses have been growing, whereas the expenses, spendings on the healthcare have been dropping. Now, I think that some people have an issue with understanding what the real threat today is. Yes, indeed, what we need is a strategic thinking and not neglecting some of these topics. Nonetheless, I think that we have gone over the top when it comes to military spending. Now, with regard to how Russia is perceived, as the doctor said, yes, we have lost any kind of faith of future redemocratization of Russia. It has been acknowledged, as did I, that Russia is definitely a threat to her immediate neighbors. Nonetheless, we definitely have to answer the question of how important that is to the US, given the overall geopolitical situation and also given the fact that this is primarily an American-Chinese issue. Now, the question is, to what extent is it important to the states to actually, well, stick their neck out, if you will. This is why I'm deeply convinced that long-term security can only be warranted by basing our strategy on immediate commercial, cultural, political alliances. Long-term, that would definitely require pan-European security architecture and also leaving Europe to Europe, an integrated Europe ready to assume greater accountability for military safety, for military security. Now, in terms of the climate change and preventing climate change, one other thing, we see Europe has been kind of positioned as a beggar in this debate, as the supplicant, what a word. I think that we should definitely make sure that it is our responsibility to assign greatest polarity to Europe in this overall arrangement. Now, what can we do in terms of future digital development? If we have the Ericsson as our larger player, we should fight for Ericsson. We have ecological targets and we have European objectives. We have to put the thing together. I think that carbon customs would definitely be a worthwhile tool. On the one hand, it would meet our ecological objectives. It would force China and the US to understand that if they want to access the European market, they will have to take the carbon tax into account. And on the other hand, it would also be in favor of European policies, because we would also set high limits for ourselves, not to mention the fact that we want to avoid high limits set by others, such as the Chinese. I think that we ought to be safeguarding the European interest at all levels, military as well as commercial. And that takes me back to climate-related matters. I deeply believe that Europe is most definitely the most ambitious player on the climate change protection market. And I think that it would be great for us if our agenda were to impact the world. So thank you very much. Thank you very much for your Euro enthusiasm. We could also, okay, since you mentioned sticking out your neck, and in Polish, the way we say it is that, are you going to die for Gdańsk? So the question is, where that Gdańsk lies today. Now, on behalf of this Ignacy Daszyński Center and the Friedrich-Ebert Foundation, I would like to thank all our participants and our panelists. I would like to thank for all the voices and comments here. I would like to thank the interpreters as well, who are working with us today. Mr. Rafał Rogowski and Aleksandra Sobczak, we would like to thank you as well. We are being thanked for excellent interpreting. That is obviously very nice to hear. Thank you. And last but not least, our invitations. On behalf of the Ignacy Daszyński Center and Friedrich-Ebert Foundation, I would like to invite you to join our seminar concerning working in post-pandemic reality. The meeting is going to be moderated by a professor from one of the international universities, and we are going to be joined by Deputy Paulina Matysiak, a member of the Left Club, Professor Sławomir Czapnik of the Apollo University, and Gafni Bischoff, MEP for the Social Democratic Party of Germany. Now, this meeting is going to take place in 6 days on December the 2nd at 6 p.m. I hope you are all going to join us. All that remains for me to do is to wish you a wonderful evening in this pandemic reality. Goodbye, and we hope to see you again.